In this week's In-Ear Insights, Katie is currently down with COVID. She's getting better though, which is good. So John's here to sub in, and we're talking about content marketing trends. So John, when you look out at the landscape of content marketing and all the stuff that people are doing, what do you see as the content marketing trends that are worth paying attention to? What do you think are the content marketing trends right now of 2022, and as we start into the back half of the year, start thinking about 2023?
Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore TikTok. I mean, that is just the 800-pound gorilla or whatever tired metaphor you want to use for a big, large thing that is taking up space. And I it's tough. I have a lot of issues with it and a lot of problems, but you just can't get away from the fact that there are people that will just sit down and veg for like 3 hours just streaming through these videos. And they've done a perfect job in making it completely frictionless. So obviously TikTok at the top of the pile, video in general, completely gaining momentum on a ton of fronts. There's a ton of stuff going on. Even over the top video too. I mean, the fact that basically TV is all on demand streaming services. So that's giant. And I guess those would be the big three. And then of course the explosion in automated content too is also crazy. It's complete pandemonium, basically. That's my take.
It's interesting because I was looking at these roundup articles that were written at the beginning of calendar year. Everyone's saying, here are the content marketing trends to pay attention to in 2022. And I went through about 40 of these. Uh-huh. And what I found sort of interesting was that there's not a lot that's substantially different from year to year, because we've looked at these lists from 2019, 2020, so on and so forth. And other than the pandemic being kind of a big deal, there hasn't been a ton. So I put them in 3 buckets. Themes, formats, and tactics are sort of the things that we look at. So in the themes, these are the major themes that people called out in their articles. And this is like Forbes and HubSpot and Marketing Profs. And so a lot of, they're reputable marketing publications. They're not like, some guy's blog. Empathetic comment, being more human, which we've heard for like the last 20 years. Add value. Your content has to add value, build community, improve your customer experience. Create great experiences, which is more of a point at interactive, and be inclusive. And of those themes, the only one that was relatively new this year that I hadn't seen in previous years was the inclusivity one on making sure that our content is accessible, inclusive, diversity focused, etc. From your point of view, in terms of themes, do these resonate as trends, or are they so canned that essentially they're the same thing year after year?
There's definitely obviously it's kind of just the be more human. I'm surprised transparency is not, at least transparency's fallen off that list, which is good. But I think the ones that ring to me, improve CX, like I think that is a forgotten one that does need to always be kept in mind. People get too wrapped up in branding and their own internal stuff, and it's like, if you're going through and examining every step of the customer's journey, that only helps you. And I do like be inclusive. Like, it's great to see that, given in light of like all of the, foolishness we've seen here in the States and all the craziness going on. And I don't know. It's a very bizarre thing, but we see so many tech companies, stepping up and actually taking a stand on a lot of these big issues. And we can argue on that stuff forever. But it was funny. Last week, I had been talking with Seth Godin about his Carbon Almanac. He's done this whole project on global warming. And he was basically saying that we get wrapped up so many times in kind of like fighting with the people in the back row, the bottom 10% that are just never going to believe in inclusivity and fighting with those people. But really, through all these channels, you can kind of see that, the majority does want to go in this direction, and people do want to be included. And then there's a huge tie into product, because if your product is for a certain group of people, helping them be seen and talking to them in their terms and understanding how their lives work, like that's huge. I think there's huge opportunity there that we've just scratched the surface on.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's take a look at some of the formats now, going into the format section of what people think are trends. So we have visual content, video in general, which has been the case since 2005 when Google bought YouTube. Infographics, making a resurgence, I guess, after about a decade of not being the favorite child. And then short form video, of course, TikTok and its ilk in there. In audio content, podcasting, people are still saying it's the new thing, even though it's been around since 2004. Live social audio, so Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces. Twitter Spaces, I have seen more people toying with. I'm still not convinced there's a there yet, but who knows? Virtual reality, AR, and this also includes, the metaverse, as it were. But AI generated text, machines crank out lots of mediocre content, events, virtual, live, and this new category that they've, I guess, renamed hybrid events now as fusion events to put a new spin on a now many year product. Web3 was sort of the big new thing in these lists, NFTs and their ilk. Whether or not you like them, they are at least newer. And then interactives, of course, and stuff. So from a formats perspective, anything here that, besides NFTs and TikTok, that you've seen that's missing from this list of content formats?
Let's see, missing. Yeah, at first I was thinking kind of gamification stuff, but that would be really more tactics. That's kind of layering on top of that stuff. So that one doesn't really count there. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd like not seeing webinars or training. You'd think that would be, those two would be on there. Yeah, obviously no surprise with the short form video thing. NFTs are a weird bucket. And this is like news to nobody, right? We've been talking about Emperor having no clothes in that segment forever. I think, and I guess to give it a little bit of credit, like interesting things can be done if the NFTs are tied to real world stuff. Like we've talked about these events where they say, okay, you buy the thing and now you get entry to the next 5 conferences, or you do get something, not just the buy your own star or buy some
digital Pokemon, basically.
Yeah, right. It's again the Beanie Babies. I'm always joking, right? These NFTs are going to pay for my kids' college. So yeah, a lot of weirdness there, but otherwise, no, nothing. I guess video games would be one that I don't see on there that I would put way up there. I guess that might be a tactic too. It's where you want to draw the line, but I think that channel of video games is just totally insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love that in interactive.
Okay.
Okay, and then of course our bucket of tactics. We have influencer marketing, user-generated content, A/B testing of content, content analytics, newsjacking, which is now 15 years old. I think personalization of content, repurposing content, data-driven storytelling, and voice search. I would say of these, it's interesting. Personalization, people talk a lot about that, but they're talking about persona-based personalization. So doing better market research and having your content be more tailored, as opposed to actual personalization where you visit a site and the content is tailored just to you. Not very many companies seem to pull that off. So from the tactics perspective, what do you see as the trends that are not on here that should be on here?
I hate to say it, but it's kind of having advertising driving to your content is a major tactic that you've got to have in the mix. You need to buy access to it, but otherwise, that's pretty much it. I'm trying on that. I'd be surprised. I'm surprised there's not like a thought leadership or some kind. You do have influencer marketing. But really, the most tried and true content stuff is just putting out relevant content in your vertical or niche, making the best content in the space. That's kind of the classic and most tried and true tactic. Because really everything else, these are great ways to kind of boost stuff as it goes. But without the actual meat in the pipeline, you're kind of stuck with, if you're just doing the same top 5 things you need to know about X as everybody else, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, these things like just having good content, I mean, I would not bucket as a trend because that should be par for the course. If you're not making decent content, then nothing else really matters.
Dead in the water.
So there are a few things that I thought were missing here that are worth discussing. And you alluded to one of them at the front of the show: values aligned content, so cause based content, brands taking a stand, etc. I think that's both a tactic as well as sort of an overall theme that, to your point, as the environment changes and as our audience changes, when we look at Generation Y and Generation Z, they are in general, it's a generalization, but they're in general a lot more values focused, and they do pay attention to virtual signaling by brands, with some levels of cynicism, which is due, but they do look at brands that are actually doing what they say. So I think that's one of those things that didn't make the list that probably should have. A second one are the private social media communities. I think that's a miss. We're talking Slack, Discord, etc.
Velvet rope stuff, yeah.
Velvet rope stuff, where some of these communities are gigantic. Like there's a couple of SEO communities on Discord, like a couple 100,000 people in it. Now, granted, keeping up with general chat, it's like, watching the Matrix, scrolling by. But there's some fantastic communities, professional communities on these services. Of course, it would be remiss if we did not mention the Trust Insights Analytics for Marketers community, which is around 2,500 folks now. Joe Polizzi's The Tilt, his content, next generation content community, I think is around, let's say it's like 500 folks now. It might be higher than that. But those communities are definitely growing. And the third one, which I was thinking about earlier, was looking at the way Netflix has evolved in the last 20 years, from mail you DVDs to stream the hit movies you want, to creating from whole cloth new franchises that people really want. Stranger Things as an example, and inheriting and repurposing existing franchises when they bought Lucifer or they bought Cobra Kai and stuff. So acquiring and then extending franchises. If you've got the budget, or you've got the ability to partner up, I think there's something to be said for building content franchises that, again, have that sort of uniqueness you're not going to get anywhere else. You're not going to get that specific kind of content from someone else. So what are the things that in your marketing you could turn into an actual franchise? An example for maybe from us, from our newsletter, we have a column in there right now called Data Diaries, which and the So What live stream. These essentially are products. They're not products people pay money for, but they are products, and if we chose to, we could invest more in them and turn them into either products or turn them into like headliner pieces of content, headliner essentially franchises where people would tune in just for that thing, and it would stand alone.
Yeah, I can see how that's, anything you can do on that front. If you can build something where people, spend enough time with the brand that they then end up wanting, asking you to produce more, that's a home run. It doesn't get any bigger than that.
Exactly. I think when we think about, for example, marketing over coffee, about half the shows are interviews, right? And you actually turned a good chunk of that into a book, right? B2B Marketing Confessions was essentially, was that extracted from a lot of the interviews?
That was just a crazy project. Well, Confessions was more tactics. We did the Marketing Over Coffee playbook where we had grabbed all the episodes. And yeah, it's amazing how so much of the tactical day-to-day stuff just, you go back about a year and a half and it's just useless. And so a lot of the interviews give you more evergreen stuff that you can repurpose. But yeah, that's just a good example of transmedia, going through, having somebody sift through the past year of audio stuff and take the text bites of that you can get. It's tough. It's a ton of work trolling through all that content to get to the stuff that's still relevant. It's a lot of editorial lift, and it pretty much broke even as far as like the effort it took to make it versus the number of copies sold. So yeah, that's a tough one. I think that is one of those things where if we diverted the resources to it and we produced 3 or 4 volumes, like it may finally hit that turning point where it becomes an industry trend or book. But yeah, I don't know. We've just kind of dumped more time into additional audio or other video. We didn't go down that route just because it's that project took like 2 years. I mean, it was insane. It's just takes so much time to sift through and get it into a new format.
hmm the other thing that you could look at in terms of trying to hunt down where maybe the kinds of things that could become franchises is looking at your existing content that you have, and then looking at very granularly, looking at for drop offs and figuring out where the points that people think are important and then pulling those out. So here, for example, this is in YouTube. This is one of our more popular videos on from Trust Insights on setting up Matomo for WordPress. And YouTube will tell you, here's your retention rates, right? So at this point here, about 90 seconds into the 30 seconds into the video, that's where your highest retention rate is. Then obviously, there's a second bump here around minute 3. So if you have the ability on your most popular content to isolate what those moments are, to your point, it's not just atomization though. Atomization takes apart all the content, distributes the different pieces. You could take the most popular pieces, figure out if they're strong enough to stand alone, particularly if there's a repeated segment of some kind, and then bucket that together and say, okay, well, this is going to be the new thing. So looking for ideas within your content that you create, because if you're creating a lot of content, it's like a venture capital fund, right? 99% of the content you create is probably not going to be a hit, but every now and again you're going to get that that one or two big lightning strikes, and then figuring out, okay, how can we take that lightning strike and build it into a new franchise. So from that Netflix perspective, I mean, that's essentially what Netflix is doing. They're creating all these series, they're creating all these original shows, and yeah, some of them are stinkers. Some of them don't work pretty well, and some of them, like Stranger Things, become so much pop culture that literally there's a Domino's created an app just for season 4 to allow you to order pizza with your mind.
Yeah, well, I've seen in the freezer aisle there's Stranger Things chicken nuggets and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, that is just everywhere all the time. And it's amazing when you think about Netflix how much data they have. People don't realize, they think, oh, well, you can see who's viewing it, but no, they can get every user down to the, okay, how many minutes did you go? And knowing that, okay, this is a show where everybody churns through every episode and does it in a month or whatever. That's just, yeah, there's so much more data. It's weird, even on the music front too. I've started to see some artists do that, releasing music and not putting it in any form for sale. Like, you must stream it from something is the only way to hear it, because they always have the data as far as, is it being taken, and are people making it through, and which tracks are the most popular and all that stuff.
Yep. It's interesting you mentioned that, because when you look at a lot of the analytics that people use for content, it's usually pretty, I was also going to say rudimentary. Like, okay, what was their most popular post and things like that. I was reading one of the content roundups, talking this piece of content walking through what makes top ranked content, and they pulled out all these different stats, like top ranked content has an average of X number of words and things, but at no point did they do any kind of a regression analysis to say, like, actually, even though length is longer in these pieces, length has no actual correlation to the effectiveness of the piece. And that's something that consistently goes missing in content analytics, is to say, yeah, here are the factors that actually map to the outcome you care about, and everything else is just kind of noise. And I'm not sure why, other than maybe just lack of resources or lack of talent, no one's doing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is because the content itself is a factor, right? I mean, if it's like, if you have your best video, then you're just saying, well, that's the best content, that's why it's there. But you'd have to have a bigger library to do that, those additional analytics. But yeah, I could see if you already have a brand, then that would be giant. You'd be able to really see what the heck is affecting which parts of it are doing better and what formats are more wanted. Yeah, I don't know. Have you heard of anybody doing A/B testing on that kind of front? I've never heard anybody trying anything along those lines, as far as releasing multiple versions of something to see how they run.
Other than ad-based stuff, it's really hard to do that in general, because and obviously email split testing. It's hard to do content split testing because you don't have control necessarily over who does what, right? If you put a piece of content up, you're always going to have some noise from sources that are not part of the campaign, and you can account for that. There are statistical methods for accounting for that, but nobody uses them.
Yeah, it's just not there yet.
Yeah, you can do like either uplift modeling or propensity score modeling, which is essentially retroactive A/B testing. um, to see. But even then, it's really difficult to do that because, again, there can be a lot of confounding factors that are difficult to take advantage of. That's one of those cases where there are too many inputs sometimes to build a model that's statistically relevant.
Yeah, but so when you get a brand that wants to dig into this stuff, like where do you start? What's the normal course that, where you have at least odds of finding something?
I mean, the first place you would start is, does any of your content work? Period. Right. So, um, a real simple example is going into their analytics and building a content attribution model, saying, okay, of the content you're publishing on your site, does any of it lead to conversion? Looking at a content efficiency model, like, okay, how many page views of your blog does it take to net a conversion? If it's like 10,000, like, okay, you're pretty clearly your blog's not working if it takes you that many views just to net one conversion of any time. Those are I would call those sort of the low hanging fruits. Same with your basic source medium multi-touch attribution. Like, okay, where is your traffic coming from that leads to conversion? If it's coming from, pay to play, and there's no organic search in there's no email in there's no organic social in there, that's like, okay, content's not standing on its own. Like, it depends on the maturity of the company. If you're just getting started and nobody knows who you are, pay to play is the way to go, right? To build that audience. But after a couple of years of pay to play to build that audience, some of it should be coming back organically. Some of it, if your content's good, people should be like, actually, that was really good. I'm going to subscribe to your newsletter or whatever. And if that's just not happening, then yeah, you've got some indicators that your content's not very good.
Yeah, right. Well, and then you get stuck on that treadmill of every quarter you have to dump the money because you're just never getting the organic stuff. That's where, you get that's how it scales and how the business model eventually works. Otherwise, you're just shoveling cash into the furnace.
Yeah. I mean, over time, it should be like intersecting lines. Like, in the beginning, page should be high, and then over time, it should decline as you become more effective. And unpaid should start at zero in the beginning, and then go up over time as the value of your content and your ability to retain your audience improves. More and more of your audience should become accustomed to hearing from you and want to hear from you, and those two lines should go in reverse of each other. Whether it actually happens or not, a lot of it depends. It depends on the quality of the content. I mean, it is annoying in a lot of ways that build quality content is listed as a trend, because a trend implies something that's mathematically growing or shrinking over time, and that's been the same advice for 100 years, but it's there because nobody's doing it.
Yeah, right. Well, it's like those CMO marketing budget numbers we always see. Like you said, if the CMO beliefs were true, budgets would be doubling every year for the past 50 years. And of course, what actually happens is different. Yeah, it's tough too, because it's, there's the quality of your content, but if you have some other company that's just doing it, more of it and better, like we've seen this before with orgs that just get squashed because somebody is more dedicated to quality content and they take the oxygen out of the room for them.
Yeah, I mean, HubSpot spent 10 years and $100 million on building inbound marketing. They basically took Seth Godin's permission-based marketing and rebranded it, and yeah, to your point, just took all the air out of the room for his idea.
Yeah, and all the other marketing trade rags. It's amazing to see how their organic traffic is just runaway train.
Yep. So, and there's something to be said for just creating a lot of it. So, upcoming trends then, from where you sit and from the people that you've talked to, what are the trends that or the things that have the potential to be trends that you've heard from people that aren't on the list, that aren't big enough yet to be trends, but maybe are things people should start poking into sooner rather than later?
One thing that I just got pitched recently and I'm digging into a little bit is, Gen Z opinions on things. And you had mentioned that already a little bit, them being more value-based. The interesting thing was in vehicle sales, them actually wanting to be more in person. So much of the, millennials and up are into the totally virtual, just have the car be dropped off at my house. Whereas Gen Zs are talking about going to dealerships, driving 3 or 4 different vehicles, getting to meet people. Like, that's a shift for them. The whole clicks and bricks transition that we saw through COVID, seems to be continuing, and it's especially weird with inflation going the way it is. People are cost cutting more, so again, that's pushing them again more towards online purchasing. Um, I don't know, the augmented reality. I've seen some real punches against that recently. I don't know. Apple reportedly was like, "Yeah, no, it's just people don't want to wear these helmets. They don't want to be further isolated from the world. Like, it's just not going to happen." And again, I totally see a lot of the NFT stuff burning to the ground over the next year. So yeah, I don't know what will come next. That's like the $1 billion question. I'm not really sure what the heck is the next thing. I think what we're watching is going to be really interesting. How much will live events rebound? And will it be a full rebound? Will it be partial? Will this hybrid stuff or fusion stuff continue to be hot? And how will the in-person stuff go? That's going to be really interesting to watch. So yeah, I don't. Sadly, there's nothing's easy. Everything's going to be on fire and a disaster. But the new stuff will come around. But yeah, I have no idea where the heck to plant a flag next.
There's some macro things I think can inform some of this stuff, particularly about your level of content marketing agility. I think it has to be much higher and much faster than it used to be. So some obvious macro things. Climate change, as you talked about earlier on, is going to continue to have increasingly more dire results, increase and cause more instability. I was reading an article this morning on if you get a certain, like an early heat wave, when some plants are flowering, like most seed plants and blueberries and stuff, it destroys the pollen. It actually renders the pollen inert, sort of sterilizes it. And so you end up with essentially very early crop failures. So things like that create more instability. And the more instability there is, the less you can market with any kind of prediction. So things like predictive analytics become much more difficult. We've seen this year, if you had a big, Q1 end of quarter content campaign, guess what? You were completely wiped out by the Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. Which in part is economics. If you had a big, marketing budget spend for the end of Q2, well, surprise, inflation is taking a bat to your knee. But one of the things I think content marketers have to be very aware of is building for both resilience and agility. Something that The Onion does really well. Back in the day, Baratunde Thurston did a great talk on how The Onion plans its content. And for every given major cultural event coming up, they have like 100 different pieces of content, just headlines usually sketched out. But they, when something happens, the president falls down a flight of stairs, whatever, instantly, boom, they've got 4 pieces of content ready, just on deck, ready to go. Their writers just tune it up and push it out the door. And for things like, major events, that's something that we should be thinking about. We may want to be thinking about banding together with non-competitive companies to have sort of a content pool, particularly as talent becomes very, very challenging to find good quality talent. And it may be an alternative to just contracting out to agencies. If you can find non-competing companies and sort of pool your best writers together, you may be able to create stuff in aggregate that's better than individuals if companies can figure out how to partner up with each other. For example, we do that with our friends over at B Squared Media, as an example. And then when we look at the content technologies that are coming out, AI based content, the writing is improving, but there's a lot happening with visual content right now. You have some new models, for example, OpenAI's DALL-E 2 model and its entire family of things is generating some very interesting content. There's, for example, there's one example they showed where it takes a picture of you and you tell it, take this picture, but change me from wearing a t-shirt to a suit. And it can do it with, reasonable, you can still tell it's manipulated, but it is definitely interesting for, I see a lot of potential for that, particularly for advertising, where if you want to be able to programmatically create 1 million ads, I could take a picture of you and change the logo on your shirt and say, take this picture of John Wall, put an AT&T logo, put AT&T logo as a cartoon, put an AT&T logo as, on fire or something like that. And the machines could credibly create that. So there's, I think, some interesting visual stuff coming up. in the next few years as well. But those would be the big trends. The macro thing is instability. If you can create content marketing plan and a content marketing strategy that is resilient to increasing amounts of instability, you're going to need that. And on the hybrid front, I think one of the things people are not paying attention to is, if you look at the data at how quickly the SARS-CoV-2 virus is mutating, the cycles between variants keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? You had the original COVID, then you had Alpha, and then you had Delta, and then you had Omicron, and you have like 20 children of Omicron, and each of these gets shorter and shorter. And every single time this sweeps through a population, it was a study in Science Journal about how it creates increasingly severe immune impacts, which means more people who have these things are going to be on these things because their ability to be active and stuff is constrained by essentially severe immune impacts. And so as we think about what hybrid events look like, we obviously have to continue to be vigilant, but also recognizing that there will be massive population health challenges in the next 20 years that will change how people consume content. Because if your immune system has been basically beaten to death by 12 variants of COVID that you've had over 10 years, you may not be able to be as active. And so we may have a population of people for whom consumption of digital content may be their primary form of entertainment because they can't do anything else.
All right, well, that's an upbeat message to throw out for everybody here today. It's only going to get worse, folks. This is you can't lie about it, though. It's we definitely have to be able to respond to this stuff and start thinking about it, because I'm sure the one thing is that there will always be novel solutions to this stuff. People could find
exactly. I think that's where virtual reality is overhyped in the short term and underhyped in the long term. I think as the technology improves, we're thinking now like a 20-year time frame, a 20-year horizon, it will be viable as an alternative. When you look, for example, at what the Unreal Engine is capable of in Unreal Engine 5 in terms of its cinematic quality stuff. Yeah, right now it needs a machine to be tied to a machine because the processing compute power required for it is crazy. But if you can get that compact and get it shrunk down over time and be more efficient, or some other alternative, having cinematic virtual reality experiences instead of kind of the weird Tron-like stuff today, may be worth exploring.
Yeah, get out of the uncanny valley. We're getting close, but it's still a little bit in the oddball stuff.
Exactly. So that's too early for that. It's too early for that. So that's not a content marketing trend you're going to be taking advantage of anytime soon, unless you're Facebook, I guess, or somebody else with billions of dollars in R&D that you can just fling around. But for everybody else, it's worth paying attention to. And it might not be bad. Again, if you form sort of these, I guess, content marketing guilds with other non-competing companies, and you have access to a pool of talent, you may want to look at like a shared development resource, somebody who can work in Unreal and create those like deeply interactive, interesting experiences that right now, are solely the purview of video games. But I was playing Cities Skyline the other day, which is a sort of a SimCity spiritual successor. And you can zoom down like into the individual streets and watch people walking around and see the in-game ads and stuff. Like, okay, this is there. I mean, even just billboard advertising in a game like that would be interesting just to from a brand awareness perspective. So there's a lot of potential in these virtual environments when they mature.
Oh yeah, no, it's going to be amazing, some of this stuff. And to see so many franchises build up in that space too. I mean, there are entire franchises now that are killing it over there. That's a big part of entertainment and how we get our stuff. But yeah, hopefully it'll be something better than having the full helmet strapped to your head and crashing into your furniture because you can't see what's going on.
Hopefully so. All right. So if you've got comments or questions or content marketing trends you want to discuss, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go over to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 2,500 other marketers are asking and answering each other's questions every single day. And wherever it is that you watch or listen to the show, if there's a channel you prefer it on, we probably have it. Go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where you can pick up the show wherever you like. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.